They brought her out like she was nothing, barefoot, bruised, wrists bound in rusted iron. But the wind whispered otherwise. It danced through her tangled hair like it remembered the princess she used to be. Zahira wasn't born to be sold. She was born beneath a comet, her cries once drowned by temple drums. But now, on this cursed morning in the heart of Thebes, she stood on the stone platform where slaves were paraded, her linen robe clinging to her like a shroud, her silence louder than screams. The crowd leaned in, not for her story, but for her skin, her youth, her price. The overseer barked. 17, untouched, strong. Coins rattled, men nodded, and still she stared forward, as if the gods themselves were watching. Somewhere deep inside, she was screaming Khamet's name, the stable boy with sky in his eyes who once carved their initials into the sycamore by the Nile. They had taken her from that riverbank with ropes and threats, and one cruel signature from her father, who sold her, not for food, but to erase a shameful love. She had chosen heart over hierarchy, and for that she was exiled from her own blood. The bidding began. Silver, gold. A merchant offered a camel caravan. Then silence. A figure stepped forward, tall, wrapped in storm-colored robes. A scar split his face like lightning carved into sandstone. He didn't speak, just raised a hand, and the crowd fell quiet. His pouch hit the platform with a weight that ended the auction. Zahira didn't flinch as the chains tugged her forward. But as she passed him, the veiled man's fingers trembled, almost reached, and in that second, her breath caught, not from fear, but recognition. No one else saw it, not the guards, not the buyers, but the wind shifted, and Zahira's lips parted like a prayer long buried. The boy who vanished was back, or a ghost wearing his shape. She didn't know, she only knew this, she was being dragged away, but her soul had just remembered how to run. The chains rattled like a warning, but Zahira didn't lower her gaze. She let the metal bite into her skin, let the guards shove her forward through narrow alleyways and sandstone courtyards. But her mind wasn't there. It was back by the river, the one place she had once believed love was safe. That memory had been her shield. But now, the wind behind her felt different, as if fate itself was exhaling. The veiled man who bought her didn't walk like the others. He moved like a shadow with a pulse, never speaking, never turning his face. But his silence screamed more than words ever could. When they reached his chariot, the guards tossed Zahira at his feet like she was a sack of barley. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. Instead, she watched the man's hands, scarred, sun-darkened, trembling for a second too long before he reached down and pulled her to her feet himself. And in that moment, his touch struck her heart like thunder cracking temple stone. She had touched that grip before, long ago, on a night when reeds swayed and two children promised forever beneath a bleeding moon, but forever had burned. He motioned for the guards to leave, handed them coins heavier than loyalty, and only when they were gone did he lower his veil just enough for her to see a sliver of his face. The scar, the lips, the eyes. Khamet. Her breath caught like a bird in a snare. Her knees went weak, but he raised a single finger to his lips. Silence. Not now, not yet. I bought you, he whispered, voice cracked from sand and sorrow, because it was the only way I could keep you alive. Zahira stared, chest pounding. The boy who vanished had returned, but he wasn't a boy anymore. He was something else now, hardened, haunted, and hiding from something bigger than either of them. Her wrists still wore iron, but her heart, that had just started breaking open all over again. The chariot moved fast. Too fast for the city's narrow roads, as if the wheels carried not just bodies, but a secret too fragile to breathe in public. Zahira sat on the cold floor beside crates of spices and faded scrolls, her wrists bound, but her eyes locked on him. Khamet. Her Khamet. Yet not her Khamet. His jaw was sharper now, his silence louder, as if years had carved caves in his soul where laughter once lived. She wanted to scream, to cry, to ask where he had gone the night her world fell apart. But all she said was, "Why didn't you come?" He flinched like the words were a blade. "I did," he said, voice low and broken. "But I was too late. Your father had already sold you. I followed the caravan into the desert, but they changed routes. For years I searched. Then I heard whispers of a girl with fire in her eyes being paraded like cattle in Thebes. I prayed it was you. I feared it was you." Zahira turned away, swallowing the tears. Outside, the city blurred. The temples, the markets, the curses etched into stone. "Why buy me now?" she asked. "Why not just take me?" Khamet's grip tightened on the reins. "Because you were owned, and in this world, a slave is safer with an owner than an escape." The word owner felt like poison between them. But before she could speak, the chariot lurched to a stop. Before them stood a small mud brick house, half hidden by palms and vines, nowhere near the life she'd known, and too quiet to be safe. "We're not staying," he said, lifting her down gently. "But you need to know something before we run. You weren't the only one betrayed. Someone in your father's house wanted you erased. Not sold, vanished." Zahira froze. The iron on her wrists had never felt heavier. "Who?" she whispered. Khamet looked toward the desert, where the sun melted into blood and dust. "Your sister." The word sliced through Zahira like a blade laced with salt. Your sister. No scorpion sting had ever bitten that deep. "Nafret?" she whispered, barely trusting her own voice. Her older sister, the golden one. The one who wore coal-lined eyes and father's pride like twin crowns. The one who smiled too sweetly, even when Zahira cried. "She was always jealous," Khamet said, leading her inside the house where silence breathed thicker than incense. "Of your voice, your beauty, your heart, and of me." The small home smelled of cedar and old papyrus, filled with nothing but maps, dried bread, and urgency. He unlocked her chains, slowly, reverently, as if freeing a goddess from stone. "When you chose me," he said, brushing rust from her wrist, "she swore she'd make you regret it. I didn't believe her, until your father changed his will, until servants vanished, until you did." Zahira staggered back, blood draining from her face. She remembered the feast night, Nafret whispering to the high priest, father smiling as if he'd gained a kingdom, her own bowl tasting faintly of mint and metal. A dreamless sleep, then ropes, then sand. "She didn't want me punished," Zahira murmured. "She wanted me erased." Khamet nodded. "And if she finds out I brought you back?" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Zahira's breath came faster. The girl who once laughed under sycamores was gone. In her place stood something colder, sharper, a woman forged in betrayal. "Then we don't run," she said. Khamet looked up, startled. "What?" She stepped into the sunlight pouring through the cracked door, face hard as limestone. "We rise. I won't live in hiding while she sits in my home, wears my jewels, tells my story like I never existed. I was sold in chains, but my name is still written in the stars." Khamet stared at her for a long, quiet moment, then bowed his head, not in sorrow, but in awe. Then, "Let's remind them who you are." By dawn, Zahira wasn't Zahira anymore. She was no longer the girl dragged across sand by greedy hands. No longer the girl sold for silence. She was the storm returned to its sky. Wrapped in a plain cloak that did little to hide her fire, she walked beside Khamet through the alleys of Thebes, not like a fugitive, but like a flame disguised as shadow. They moved beneath sandstone arches and past shrines where statues of jackal gods watched from their stone thrones, silent witnesses to a reckoning long overdue. "We start with the priest," Khamet whispered. "He was the one who brokered the sale. Your father's mouth, Nafret's puppet." Zahira nodded, eyes locked on the rising spires of the temple where justice had died long ago. The temple loomed above them like a crown of lies, its golden obelisk stabbing the sky as if even the heavens needed reminding who ruled here. But Zahira didn't tremble. She remembered walking those halls barefoot as a child, offering lotus flowers to gods who never answered. Now she returned not to pray, but to expose. Inside, priests murmured chants older than memory. She waited in the shadows until she saw him, the high priest Hekenu, draped in gold, voice drenched in false holiness. She stepped into the light. His voice died mid-verse. The room stilled. Zahira didn't speak at first. She let silence stretch like a blade across his throat. Then, softly, so only he could hear, "Tell them what you did." His face paled. You're supposed to be gone?" she finished. "Buried? Forgotten?" She stepped closer. "You sold me to silence a scandal. Now I've returned to shout." He looked to the guards, but Khamet had already drawn his blade, its tip kissing the priest's throat. "One word," Khamet growled, "and you'll be chanting with the dead." Hekenu stammered, sweat dripping down his painted brow. "It wasn't me. It was her. She said you'd betray your family, that you were cursed." Zahira leaned in. "No," she whispered. "I was sacred." And that scared her more than any curse. The priest's legs buckled. She didn't strike him. She didn't need to. The real war was just beginning, and Zahira had just let Thebes know she was alive. By the next sunrise, the city had changed. The gossip that once buried Zahira now breathed her back into existence. In markets, they whispered, "The girl sold in chains." She returned. In palace halls, scribes paused over scrolls, uncertain whether to write her name in ink or erase it with silence again. Zahira had done nothing more than stand inside the temple and speak. But in Thebes, truth spoken by the wrong lips was more dangerous than rebellion. Khamet watched the streets from a rooftop near the temple, a hood drawn low over his face. "They'll come for you," he said. "Your sister, her spies, maybe the palace guard." Zahira stood beside him, wind tugging at her cloak, hair loose like a banner of war. "Let them," she said. "They thought I was gone. Now I'm a shadow in their corridors. That's more dangerous than a queen with a crown?" Her voice wasn't just stronger. It was steadier, like the Nile before a flood. "We need proof," Khamet muttered. "The priest's confession won't be enough." Zahira nodded. "Then we take the one thing Nafret fears more than exposure, her reflection." That night she returned to the house her father once owned, now guarded like a tomb. But she didn't knock. She slipped through a servant tunnel she once used as a child, barefoot and breathless, Khamet just behind her like a memory that could now kill. Inside, nothing had changed. Same scent of incense and polished stone. Same tapestries stitched with gods who had watched her fall and dared to look away. And then she saw it. Her room, her mirror. But where her face once belonged now hung a painting of Nafret, draped in Zahira's robes, wearing Zahira's necklace, the jade one Khamet gave her under the sycamore tree. Zahira stepped forward, and something inside her cracked, not with sorrow, but with clarity. "She didn't just want me gone," she whispered. "She wanted to wear my life." And now, Zahira would make sure the mask shattered in front of every eye in Thebes. The Hall of Echoes hadn't heard her voice in years. It was where nobles schemed, where priests whispered judgments that carried the weight of gods, and where Zahira now walked unveiled. The guards stiffened. The nobles froze. Even the high priest turned to stone when her footsteps echoed across the marble floor. "She can't be here," someone muttered. "She was exiled." "She was sold," another corrected. "She's a slave." "She's a ghost," a servant whispered. Zahira kept walking. Khamet flanked her, silent but ready. The bronze doors slammed behind them like thunder. At the front of the court stood Nafret, radiant in the stolen light of power, her lips painted like blood, her hands resting on the very throne Zahira's mother once sat beside. She smiled, but her eyes widened just a little. Enough. Zahira didn't bow. She didn't kneel. She faced the entire court like she had nothing left to lose. Because she didn't. "I am Zahira, daughter of Setapenre," she said. "Wrongfully sold, betrayed by blood. And I have returned not for mercy, but for truth." The silence after her words was a living thing. Then, slow and serpentine, Nafret stepped down from the dais. "My poor sister," she cooed. "This is not the place for fairy tales. Guards, touch me," Zahira snapped. And Thebes will know you fear your own reflection." She turned to the elders. "Ask her where she got this," she said, holding up the jade necklace, snatched from the painting the night before. Gasps fluttered through the room. The chief scribe stepped forward. "That belonged to Zahira," he said, puzzled. "It was a gift from the stables. Years ago." Zahira looked at Nafret. "And yet she wore it while I was in chains." The crowd shifted. Doubt bloomed. "Ask the high priest," Zahira continued, voice rising. "Ask him who paid to keep me gone." Hekenu paled behind his golden robes, and in that trembling pause, Zahira knew the first crack had formed. The mask would not survive the day, and neither would her sister's lies. Nafret's smile was still there, but it cracked now, trembling at the corners like sandstone before a quake. "Do you hear this madness?" she said, voice sharp, eyes darting across the court for loyalty that wasn't there. "She walks in from the shadows with a stable boy and stories, and you believe her." But the court wasn't looking at Zahira like a ghost anymore. They were looking at Nafret like a mirror that had finally stopped lying. The chief scribe held the necklace as if it burned. "We remember Zahira's voice," he said. "We remember the songs she sang during the harvest festivals. We remember her courage, but we never heard her scream when she vanished." Khamet stepped forward, his blade still sheathed but heavy with meaning. "Because they never let her scream," he said. Nafret scoffed. "You mean the boy who was whipped for trespassing? Who dared touch a noble?" "I mean the man who followed your caravan across the desert," Zahira cut in, "while you were dressing in my robes and feeding my mother lies." A gasp rose like a tide. Nafret's poise cracked. "You have no proof." Zahira turned to the elders. "Then ask her to swear on the blood of our mother, who died believing I ran away." The hall held its breath. Nafret's lips parted, but no words came. No oath, no denial, just silence. And silence, in Thebes, could be louder than guilt. "She can't," Zahira said, voice trembling now, but not from fear, from release. "Because she told her lies to the one woman who believed her most, and that woman wept herself to death." A priest stepped forward, one who had served in the house of Setipenre for years. "The night Lady Zahira vanished," he said. "I was there. I saw Nafret slip something into her tea." Nafret turned pale as moonlight. "You lie. You stole," Zahira snapped. "My place, my peace, my name, but not my voice. And today, I take it all back." Guards moved without command now, stepping beside Nafret, not to protect, but to escort. She shrieked, lunged, grabbed Zahira's arm with claws instead of fingers. "He'll never love you. You think you've won? He'll never forget what you were." Zahira looked her in the eyes, unblinking. And still, he came back, when no one else did. Nafret's scream echoed through the pillars as she was dragged away. Not like a queen, but like a curse breaking. And for the first time in years, Zahira stood not as a victim, but as a storm finally named. The court emptied slowly, like a theater after the final act, whispers trailing behind every step, as if Thebes itself didn't know how to hold its breath any longer. But Zahira didn't move. She stood at the base of the dais where her sister had ruled in her name, staring at the empty throne like it was something sacred and poisoned all at once. "It's yours," the chief scribe said softly. "Your lineage. Your right." But she shook her head. "I don't want a throne built on silence." Behind her, Khamet stepped close, but not too close. He had followed her through deserts and shadows, but now he didn't know where he belonged. "You won," he said, barely above a whisper. "You took back your name." Zahira turned, eyes tired but burning. "What if I don't want my name back?" He flinched. "What?" "I don't want the girl who was betrayed," she said. "I don't want the daughter who was sold like clay. I want the woman who stood in front of her sister and said no more. I want her." The silence between them was fragile, tender. "Then what do you want?" he asked, the boy inside him still trembling. She stepped toward him, slowly, as if crossing time itself. "I want a beginning no one wrote for me. Not my father, not my blood, not the gods. Her fingers brushed his, gently, then gripped them like a lifeline. "Do you still love me?" Khamet blinked. "I never stopped. Even when I was owned. You were never owned. You were only lost." And with those words, the iron in her soul melted. She leaned in, and beneath the cracked ceiling of the hall that once buried her, Zahira kissed the boy who never let go. Not like a lover, but like a survivor clinging to the only truth left. Outside, the streets of Thebes began to shift. Slaves whispered her name like a spell. Women watched her like a prayer come to life. And Zahira knew she didn't need a crown. She had become something rarer, a symbol, a storm, a story the city could never silence again. Thebes didn't forget what it saw that week. The daughter who returned, the sister dethroned, the chains undone. But stories in Egypt didn't end with applause. They were carved in stone or erased by the winds. Zahira chose neither. She chose to write her ending with breath, with footsteps, with the kind of choices no scribe could twist. She did not take her sister's throne. She turned it into a council seat, shared by freed women, scholars, workers, voices once shut behind veils and bars. "Let power pass through hands," she said, "not crush them." They called her foolish. They called her wild, but they also called her alive. And in a city where many walked but few lived, that made her unstoppable. Khamet stayed by her side, but never in front of her. "You don't need my shadow," he once said. "You are your own sun." And she was. Every morning she walked the markets where she was once sold, greeting the very merchants who once bid for her as if greeting the ghosts she had outlived. She wore no gold, just the jade necklace, the only thing never stolen. And when people bowed, she lifted them. "Don't kneel for me," she'd whisper. "Stand for yourself." Word of her spread beyond Thebes, into Memphis, into the desert, into places where girls still feared their worth was weighed in silver. Zahira became more than a woman. She became a name whispered by mothers, tattooed on the arms of freed slaves, scribbled on walls in secret. She returned. Years later, when she died, she wasn't buried in a royal tomb. She was buried beneath the sycamore tree, where Khamet had first kissed her. No gold, no guards, just wind and stars, and a river that remembered everything. And beside her grave, a stone read not her titles, but the truth. She was sold in chains, but her love couldn't be caged. Her spirit never was.